All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Emergency Management Committee meeting. Today is October 25th, 2017. My name is Luong Yang, the chair of this committee, and with me are council members Palmisano, Gordon, Quincy, and Council President Johnson. Councilmember Reich may be joining us shortly. And we are a quorum of this committee, so we can conduct the businesses of this committee. And, you know, before we start, Councilmember Palmisano had something to add to the agenda.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I'd like to add the staff direction that is before you, and there are copies at the edge of the dais regarding police department body-worn camera staffing. I'd like to add that at the end of this consent agenda, so as item number 7, and then I can speak to it when you're ready.
Okay, why don't you speak to it?
Oh,
or speak to the adding of it? Or
sure. We're adding this as a result of my ongoing conversations with Chief Arredondo, and also from the budget hearing last week, where he indicated that these 2 video analyst positions for the police department are very important to him, and he said he needs them as of yesterday, I think were his exact words. So this is an opportunity to direct human resources staff to help us get those FTEs moving so that they can be in place as soon as possible. This does not allocate 2018 budget money for it yet, but this starts the process so that they could be in place as soon as possible.
Okay. Does anybody have any issue with placing this on the agenda, not on the specifics of or the merits of this, but just on putting it on the agenda? No issues. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We will add that as item number 7, and that will be before the discussion items. And so we'll move the 2 discussion items, 8 or 9. And we will not call this a consent item. We will have a discussion on this, but the first discussion item. All right, that being said, we have 6 consent items and 3 discussion items. The first consent item is a gift acceptance from John Jay College for Smart On-Crime Innovations Conference travel expenses. The second item is a Paul Coverdell Forensic Science Improvement Grant Award. The third item is a contract amendment with Trans Languages for Language Translation Services. The fourth item is a grant from the U.S. Bank for increased video camera security along the East Lake Street corridor. Fifth item is a contract with Minneapolis Public Housing Authority for Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. And the sixth item is a contract with the Department of Veterans Affairs for fire suppression and emergency services. Anyone want to pull anything off for discussion? All right, seeing none, and I just saw that Councilmember Reich just joined us. Welcome. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. And the first discussion item is the staff direction from Councilmember Palmisano. So Councilmember Palmisano, why don't you take it?
Sure. Well, the direction is about as succinct as my talking points here today. I know you all are well aware of the results of the body-worn camera audit, and this is one of the follow-up items that we can do right away from it. Helping to get analyst FTEs working within our body camera program is needed, and it's part of the labor-intensive process of making a body-worn camera effective. I think that originally, and this comes from my understanding from conversations with Chief Arredondo, both privately and in public from last week, Chief Arredondo feels strongly that while originally there were supervisors that were going to be charged with oversight of the body-worn camera program for those officers that they supervise, that isn't actually realistic, and that these 2 analyst positions could help to provide just data and information to keep it in front of supervisors to help with the effectiveness and the behavior change that we need here from the body-worn camera program. So what's before you is simply asking the police and human resources staff to begin the hiring process for these 2 analyst positions. And that's what I'm asking. Um, a question you might have would be how to pay for it. Well, the process will take a while. The hiring process won't actually incur money needed for it until 2018. So the 2018 budget is how we will work to get these in an ongoing way into our police department.
Councilmember Quincy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just, as we're working through the budget process, I just wanted to make a note that I appreciate this being added and being considered. I think it does advance the work, and pleased it doesn't have a dollar amount or a staff direction attached to that as part of the budget process that we don't need to open up at this point. But it's clear, especially from ongoing discussions that have happened since the body-worn camera policy has been implemented and changed, as Councilmember Palmisano pointed out. So I'm very supportive of this staff direction, and think it will advance the work that may be coming forward or may not be coming forward through our budget process. But that should not derail us from advancing the work as fast as we can.
Any other comments, questions? Councilmember Palmisano, these are civilians, right? They're not sworn. Is that correct?
Correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. And, I just want to echo Councilmember Quincy's point, which is that, sometimes when we do the budget process, what I've seen is that typically we allocate from the budget process, and it takes maybe about 6 months or maybe even longer to get that process started in terms of hiring folks. Sometimes I've seen longer than even 6 months. And so, to your point, Councilmember Palmisano, about just, needing this yesterday, to push this so that maybe it takes a couple months instead of 6 months would be good. So I appreciate this, and I will be supporting this. Any other questions or discussion? All right, seeing none. The motion's before us to move and adopt the staff direction. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Right. The second discussion item, which is item number 8 now, is the 911 priority dispatch system implementation update, and Director Hunt, you're up.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'm happy to be here to give you an update on one of our major investments that we made in technology and best practices in 911. And that is the priority dispatch system, which we just went live on at the beginning of this month. So I'm going to just brief you on what that involves. Priority dispatch, we are currently at our full implementation phase. This has been a lengthy project. We started back in May of 2016 by issuing an RFP. We were granted the funding, and so now it's come to full fruition, and we are fully live on the software. Priority dispatch system is a proven protocol-driven emergency call-taking system. It provides assistance to our call takers in processing emergency calls, and it organizes and improves the information that's being passed on to the first responders with better outcomes being the ultimate goal. Priority dispatch, it had its birth in the medical field years ago when the medical dispatchers began teaching people how to do CPR over the phone, for instance. This program had its origins through that and has subsequently been developed for processing fire and police calls. It also reduces liability risks and increases responder safety. And that is because every call gets the same level of service regardless of who the call taker is, and they are following a set of best practices that are governed by a governing body and constantly updated. So in a nutshell, the priority dispatch system allows our agency to better prioritize 911 calls. It provides life-saving instructions for critical situations. For instance, someone trapped in a burning building. We now have proven best practices to help people be as safe as they can be depending on the situation. It consistently provides every caller with the highest level of service, and it assists in getting better information to the responders by being able to continue to gather information after the responders have been dispatched. So there's no delay in dispatching. Now, of course, Minneapolis 911 has done this all along in our homegrown, home-developed dispatch system. That, though, required our staff to memorize many sets of instructions and questions, and was not always consistent. Each staff member has completed a 48-hour training and certification program, plus subsequent refresher training. The system and the academy requires recertification every 2 years, with a required 36 hours of continuing education for every employee. Here again, this just highlights that the protocols follow internationally recognized standards, gives universal consistent care and service to every caller, prioritizes calls for appropriate and fast response, and provides the 0-minute dispatch life support using pre-arrival and post-dispatch instructions to help callers be as safe as they can depending on the situation. I will say that we, as part of this, have a dispatch committee, dispatch review committee, that consists of representatives from police, fire, our dispatchers, and IT, so that meeting weekly, they can review all of the responses. And we did sit down with fire and police and go through an exhaustingly long process to rethink all the responses in the city because those had not been revisited in years. So what to expect when you call 911? The protocols begin with a set of questions. What's the address of the emergency? Please repeat the address for verification, and then tell me exactly what happened. The call taker can send help while gathering information for responders, can provide those life-saving instructions if applicable, and will remain on the line with you until help arrives if that is necessary. The priority dispatch system does give an agency a defendable standard for emergency dispatch. I think I've talked about this already. Another key benefit of the system is a quality improvement module, and that is an extremely robust program that helps identify where we may need to make those adjustments and helps staff know what their performance is at any time, and so we can learn and grow along with the system. Oops, what did I do? We are working toward accreditation through the International Academy. Becoming an accredited center of excellence, we would join other centers, accredited centers across the country, and in other countries as well, to make sure that we're providing up-to-date public care and efficient resource utilization. And I do have a little video, maybe. Looks like maybe that's not going to play. We'll try it again. Oh. Give me 1 second, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
This is in Charlotte. We don't have our own video completed yet, but we are working on that with our communications. So just replace Charlotte with Minneapolis.
Of what to expect when you have to call in an emergency. As you will see in this video, a caller dials 911 to report smoke coming out of her kitchen.
Mom, what's that smell?
I don't know. What is it? Oh, there's smoke in the kitchen. Come on, girls. Let's get out.
You will notice two critical questions asked before responders are dispatched. What is the address of the emergency? And tell me exactly what happened. These critical questions allow responders to identify where the emergency is and what the emergency is in case the call is disconnected. Listen as the 911 call taker asks important questions that will help the responders prepare for the emergency, as well as assist a caller by providing pre-arrival instructions. These questions and pre-arrival instructions are all part of an accredited program known as Emergency Fire Dispatch.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
4045 Bridgeview Drive.
And tell me exactly what happened.
I was in the living room and I think there's a fire in my kitchen.
Stay on the line. My partner will be sending help while I ask a few more questions.
Engine 205, 4045 Bridgeview Drive, structure fire, incident channel 29.
Okay, stay on the line. May you repeat that address for verification?
4045 Bridgeview Drive.
And what's the phone number you're calling from?
6704152.
What is your name?
Cassandra.
At that location now?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Do you see flames or smoke?
I think I see some smoke.
The fire dispatcher is now responsible for providing information to the responders as additional information is relayed to them. Continuing to answer these questions does not slow down the emergency response time.
What floor is the fire on?
The first floor.
The call taker has obtained all pertinent information and instructs the caller on what to do next.
Do not try to put the fire out and do not carry anything out that is on fire. If it's safe to do so, keep all bystanders away from the area and assign someone to guide the emergency crews to the general area. Do not approach or enter any hazardous or dangerous areas.
Okay.
I'm going to let you go now. Help is on the way. If anything worsens in any way, call us back immediately for further instructions.
Help us. Help.
So that concludes my presentation. Do you have any questions?
So, Director Hunt, I just want to say that's really interesting that it was Charlotte that was the city, but then like the city in the back of the fire department was actually Charleston.
It is Charleston.
Oh, is it?
Sorry,
Okay.
I misspoke.
Okay.
Yeah,
No.
it's Charleston.
But, you know, I do have a question, though, with regards to that. I mean, I've made a few 911 phone calls in my time where I live. And, you know, what has been, I mean, it's pretty standard from what I can see. But, you know, the one thing that was odd was that, you know, every time that I made those calls, you know, especially on shots fired calls, you know, there was always like this this pause, almost kind of like the 911 dispatcher didn't believe me until there were like several phone calls, around the same incident. And then it was like, oh, there was shots fired basically. And just wondering why that was.
Mr. Chair, without reviewing the individual calls, I wouldn't be able to say.
Okay.
Normally, we certainly, our practice is that we take everyone at their word when they call in. And sometimes some of our staff is newer. Some, there may be someone being in a coaching situation, for instance. But I would encourage you, if that happens, to let me know it so that we can look into it.
Right. Well, it wasn't anything to be alarmed about. It was just kind of a situation where I just always think like there's that pause that just makes the average person that calls just kind of think, well, do they not believe me? And then, next thing you know, there's like 10 calls from the same incident, and all of a sudden it's real now, right? And so that's just my little thing. But yeah. Any other questions? Right. Seeing none, I will move for us to receive and file this update. Any discussion? Right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Director Hunt. Our ninth item is an update on the City of Minneapolis's pledge to reduce domestic violence and the associated work plan. And with that, our City Attorney, Susan Siegel, is going to come up and give a short presentation, and then I think she's doing the introductory piece, and then one of her attorneys is going to
Great.
carry
Yes,
on.
yes, I am going to. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for allowing us to provide this update. This is, in fact, the 10th anniversary of when the City Council of the City of Minneapolis took a pledge to reduce domestic violence in the city. And looking back, we've made a lot of progress, but we know there's a lot of work yet to do. We've had some homicides, domestic homicides in the city of Minneapolis this year, which just makes us redouble our efforts. So, and Michelle Jacobson is going to present here. She's our chair of our domestic violence team. And we're also accompanied by Kirsten Kim and Brandy Bennett, who are two of our crime victim services employees who just do a fabulous job in working with victims and witnesses and providing them with support and helping to make sure that they know where to go, that they're there for trial and providing evidence so that we can proceed with prosecutions. Two things that I wanted to point out at the first, and I know Michelle is going to talk a little more about this, but one deals with what's called the Felony Enhancement List. So back a number of years ago, in 2003, the city of Minneapolis, through a federal grant, started collecting manually putting together this list, which we do now, called the Felony Enhancement List. And with domestic violence offenses, if there are so many misdemeanor domestic violence offenses, the next one qualifies for charging as a felony. But there was no way for the police to know that. So when they brought people into jail, they may be tab charged with misdemeanor. And if the person then pled out the next morning, there was no opportunity to enhance it to a felony. So we've been keeping this manual list with a paralegal, which takes up a lot of time. And it was 5-6 years ago at a budget presentation, actually, former council member Sandy Colvin Roy asked the simple question of, well, why are you doing it manually? Can this be automated? Which we then started working with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. They told us, just wait, we're getting a new system. We waited, they are now getting a new system, and we have now advocated for them to incorporate this into their new system. And so that soon, and I think Michelle may have more detail on this, but soon there will be an automated process so that police will have this statewide, not just a manual list here in the city of Minneapolis for our own police department. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. All right, so we've talked about the Minneapolis model. That's really the model we have here in Minneapolis. St. Paul has their blueprint. We call it the Minneapolis model. What the Minneapolis model really comes down to is a specialized team of prosecutors, victim witness, and other staff who really focus on evidence-based prosecutions that do not rely just on whether a victim wants to see a case prosecuted, but really if there's enough evidence to go forward with the case. But the real strong part of this is really our coordinated community response. We meet regularly with our advocates, probation, police, and the courts, and we really try and work as a group to address domestic violence occurring in the city. And part of that is through our domestic violence court, which we have here in Hennepin County and Minneapolis. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our new and ongoing initiatives. Our focus this year and going forward will be on more community outreach and engagement. I'll talk more about the enhancement list, some work on orders for protection that we are working on, and that's really the main reason we asked Kirsten and Brandy to be here today, because it is because of their efforts and their identification of the problems that were going on that we started working on that. And I really felt like that we should give them a chance to be recognized in this public location for some of the work that they helped us start. We'll talk about the grant that is just ending that we've had for working on gone on arrival cases, and then a little bit more about our domestic violence hotspots. Well, we always throw up our slide here about our conviction rate, because that is one way to easily measure the impact we are having on domestic violence cases. You'll see our conviction rate has remained fairly steady over the last couple of years. That speaks to the dedication of the team of prosecutors that I work with the police officers and the administration in the police department who have helped us develop a strong policy and evidence gathering on domestic violence cases, and then the work of all of the support staff who work with our team, everyone from our legal support specialists who type up letters for us and send out subpoenas, our file room staff who help put our files together and gather documents, our paralegals and our victim witness assistants who help us gather all the evidence and talk to our victims and witnesses. And that is the reason why we've been able to maintain such a high conviction rate. More important, though, really to me than the conviction rate really is some of the work that we've done in engaging the community and our partners. And so we've talked about these tactics, about the collaboration. You'll see on the screen some of the committees and the countywide programs that we work with. Our office is considered a leader in the area of domestic violence within Hennepin County and within the state. And I'm proud to say that I've been able to work with many of these committees and others in my office to improve the way the whole criminal justice system is handling domestic violence cases. We've been doing a lot of training and outreach for our partners. We do an annual advocacy training. This year we were contacted by Hmong American Partnership and did a day-long training in them. We started out with our partners from 911 who talked about this actual protocol that they're using for taking 911 calls. We had a police officer come and talk about their work. We talked about what we do. We had a county attorney involved, and then probation and a judge to talk about how the system handles domestic violence cases. We do training for many police agencies. Next week I'm doing training for the new judges again, and we have worked with many other agencies to do training. Our next step really is to engage more community partners. We are in the process of scheduling right now with the Cultural Wellness Center some community-based meetings and talking sessions where we'll be engaging both community-based partners who work with victims of domestic violence, not just domestic violence advocates, but people in the medical community and other local agencies, and the community to talk with them about what's going well with domestic violence, what other services do you need, and how can our city, both the police department and the city attorney's office and our other partners such as the health department, do more to improve the lives of people who are experiencing domestic violence. Those meetings are still in the process of being scheduled, but we'll have some focused in North Minneapolis and South Minneapolis, and we will get those scheduled before the end of the year. Some of the other work we want to do is do more outreach and education in our new immigrant communities and in some of the other underserved populations. And one of the things we were very lucky to receive that started on October 1st of this year is a OJP grant designed to address prosecutorial services to victims. That's a 2-year grant, and you should be seeing that come across the City Council in the next couple of weeks for the formal acceptance. But what that grant will do will fund an additional victim witness staff to work with our victims on our cases. The main focus of that grant, though, will be not just on increasing victim support, but on community education and outreach. We're already talking to some of the local hospitals, the Kook Clinic, other local programs to really make information available to victims. The other thing that we have in the works with that new grant is co-locating some of our victim witness staff at least once a week in some of the communities so that people don't have to come downtown to ask for assistance with paperwork and other things. The first location that we're looking at is the Safety Center at Chicago and Lake. There's already domestic violence advocates there several days a week. And so our plan is to place some of our staff in the community, because what we found is victims sometimes feel more comfortable going over paperwork with someone in person. And so it's not uncommon for one of our victim witness staff to be sitting in our front lobby or a conference room in our office, helping them fill out paperwork related to restitution, answering questions. And so we are going to be starting this satellite offices, I guess is what you could call them, for some of our victim witness staff so that people don't have to come downtown and pay for parking. We're also hoping that this will not just spread to victims of existing crimes, but will serve as a resource for people who may become crime victims in the future. Unfortunately, that is far too common a thing in our city, and that they will have existing information and relationships so they know what their resources and what is available to them if they do become a victim of crime. Susan talked a little bit about the felony enhancement list, and I can tell you I am very excited about working with the BCA on this change. For 6 years while I worked in the police department, I was the primary person who put this list together every week, and it is a very manual process. Back in 2003, when we started it, we had 87 defendants listed on it who we knew who would be charged with felonies because of prior convictions. And as Susan said, there wasn't a really easy way for police to identify that previously. Now the list has over 2,500 names on it, and really all of those names were manually collected by staff in my office and added to that list. Police officers then check that list to see if a person is eligible to be charged with a felony because of prior convictions for domestic violence or assault-related offenses, and then they get arrested for the enhanced felony rather than being charged with a misdemeanor, and then a lot of people having to run around at the same time and see if we can get it charged with a felony in 2 days before the defendant decides to plead to the misdemeanor to avoid those more serious consequences. And just kind of to give you a context of how many police reports that has been, since 2003, over 3,200 police reports have been coded as enhanced felonies because people were listed on this felony enhancement list. And I will say that number has grown substantially in the last few years because we've done a lot of training with officers about making sure they check that. And it's been a very effective way to hold defendants accountable for their actions and increase the safety for victims and their family, because people, when they're a repeat offender, are getting additional consequences and additional support to change their behavior. And so, like as Susan said, we've been working with the public safety staff and the BCA as they implement this new criminal history application. I am lucky enough that I'm one of the testers for the new application, so I have been able to go into the system already. And the key thing that the BCA and the courts did for us is they added an identifier to the convictions that qualify for as enhanceable convictions. And so now you can run a query in the system and say, I want to see all of the qualified domestic violence related offense convictions for a particular person, and you'll just see that information. If any of you have ever had a chance to look at the old criminal history application, I liken it to reading hieroglyphics. It is very complicated, and the information is not stored in a very I would say it's in a nonsensical manner, the way the information was stored. With the new system that they're developing, which will be launched in March, it actually makes sense. You can select and filter certain information that you want to receive, and I think will actually be a useful tool for people going forward, and will allow this idea of the felony enhancement list to include convictions from all over the state of Minnesota and be used by police officers and prosecutors throughout the state. Of course, there will be enhancements as that program continues to grow, but I'm very excited about this change, and I can check off one of the items off of my career bucket list that I wanted to see achieved before I retire. Now, luckily, I have a few more years, but if I keep checking these things off my list, maybe I can retire a little bit earlier. But we're very excited about this.
Council President Johnson.
Yes. Thank you so much. Does this, now we went past the name of the felony enhancement list. Yep. So does that encompass other violations as well? Is it make it easier if someone has a prior, and I'm not the attorney, but I mean like driving or something like that? Is that in the mix there too?
Council Chairman and Council Chair Johnson, yes. There are different queries related to DWI convictions, gun convictions, predatory offender. And I think as those features are developed, I think there will be more information going forward that will be very beneficial to police officers and prosecutors.
Thank you so much. Interesting.
The next item I want to talk about is some work that we've been doing with regards to orders for protection. I think most of you are probably familiar with orders for protection, but those are an order that a victim of domestic violence can seek to prohibit her abuser or his abuser from having any contact with them, their home, or other locations. They are a very useful tool for victims of domestic violence. However, our victim witness assistants, Brandy and Kirsten, among others, identified many gaps in the system where OFP service information is shared and updated that were not perhaps making it as useful a tool for some victims. And so one of the things that our victim witness staff has done is they are proactively identifying on our cases when a victim has applied for an OFP that has not yet been served. And then they've been working with courtroom staff, the sheriff's office, to make sure that when the person has another court date coming up, that that person is served with a copy of the order for protection. And that sounds very simple, but it was actually quite a complicated process. And so it took a lot of work and effort for them to get that coordinated. Because I think some people think the criminal justice system all talks very well to each other, but unfortunately there are lots of gaps in our knowledge and information sharing. The other thing that our staff identified was some issues that service information related to these orders were not getting entered in a timely manner. Some of those were very simple fixes. It was someone didn't know something and so they were passing it on. But some of the big issues we identified is that the order for protection short form, which police officers can use if someone has not been served with an order for protection, is a very manual process. It's still a 3-part form that officers have to write on. It then has to get mailed or sent to the courts for entering and updating. And so what we are really focusing on is increasing the speed at which this occurs. So one of the first things we're planning is some training for police departments. And I should point out that this work group consists of members from the county attorney's office, the court staff, judges, and the sheriff's office, and the police department here in Minneapolis. So we'll be doing some training. We're creating an electronic version of the short form notification so officers can fill it out on their squad computers and you can actually read the document. Because when it's handwritten, sometimes it's very difficult to read the handwriting. We're also creating an email system where the information can be shared. And then the final long-term solution, which is another item I've added to my bucket list, I guess I don't get to retire as quickly as I wanted, is to work with the BCA to create an electronic way to share that information. Similar to what they've done on DWI cases, the forms that officers had to fill out before were done in triplicate and they were very hard to read. Now they can be done electronically. And I would like to see that done with the OFP short forms as well. And then those forms could be transmitted automatically and the service information could be updated. I anticipate that will be a long process, so you'll be hearing me giving these updates probably for quite some time now. I'll talk a little bit about our work on the Viola Grant. And as you remember, it added investigators from the police department investigating the misdemeanor gone on arrival cases where a suspect flees the scene. That work is done in combination with the Domestic Abuse Service Center. You'll see from this chart that in 2013, only 25 cases were charged. When we got that additional investigator, the number of cases charged increased by over 400%. And it remains around 108, 110 cases every year. The other thing I would note is that our conviction rate for those cases has remained very high. And I'll point out that cases where a suspect is gone are some of the more difficult cases to prosecute because the victim oftentimes is the only one who can say that this is the person who did this to her. And so it's much more victim dependent than many of our other cases. And in spite of the fact that we're charging so many more cases, our conviction rate remains high, which again speaks to the team of people that I work with in the city attorney's office and the police department who have helped us create very strong cases. The other thing that you'll see with the addition of this additional resource at the Domestic Abuse Service Center, you'll see our time from case review to case charging has decreased significantly and continues to go on. That is very important because I think, as I've said to this committee before, domestic violence cases don't age very well. They're more like Boone's Farm than fine wine, I like to say. And so the faster we can get a case through the system, the better off we are. Because what it does is it shows victims that we are interested in what's going on with them, and this is a high priority for us. And so the faster we can get the case through the system, the higher our success rate is, and the likelihood that there will not be further violence is lessened as well. And also, finally, we'll talk a little bit about our Hotspots project. That is where we do the follow-ups on the domestic violence-related cases where there is no police report made because the allegations do not rise to the level of a crime being committed. As you'll see, these are in North and South Minneapolis. The North Minneapolis hotspots, when I was looking at some of the information that came out last weekend about some of the shootings in Minneapolis, a lot of those shootings were in these hotspot locations. The same with South Minneapolis. And so as part of that project, we pair an officer from the precinct along with a family therapist from the Domestic Abuse Project. They conduct a follow-up visit. They offer services, provide resource, and collect data about the family and home in the hopes that we can improve our services and resources. This is not a prosecution-based, it's a prosecution-based project, but the goal is not increased prosecution. What the goal of this project is to increase community engagement with victims, with the police department, offenders as well. This is a family-based project, not a victim-based project. We're really hoping to improve the life of the whole family. So it's about community engagement with the police and also with service providers. It's about increasing awareness, and it's about offering services. And so since we've been working on this project, we've made 1,856 different hotspots visits. We've visited over 1,358 different addresses. We've maintained a 75% success rate in making contact with people. We've spoken to over 620 different people, and we've increased awareness of the resources and other community-based resources. And so I just put a couple quotes on the screen. A lot of times it's not that initial visit where the victim says, oh my God, thank goodness you walked into my home. I was waiting for a DV advocate or a DV service provider to come to my house. What they're doing is they're getting the information. They're very grateful, as the quotes indicate, for having someone come back and check to follow up with them. But what we're finding is 3, 6, 9 months later, the therapist will get a call from a woman and say, hey, you came to my house 6 months ago. You gave me a card. I wasn't ready to talk to you then about going into supportive services for myself or my children, but I am now. And so that has been the real success of this project, is the ongoing contact that we have had from the victims who feel like they have a resource to go to. And I think there's something very important about them coming into their homes and coming to them, as opposed to making the victim go somewhere else for services. So we do plan to continue that project next year. We will be meeting with our community partners to talk about next steps and further needs. And then we are still exploring the idea of having a family navigator who could work with the police and provide more ongoing current support. And what's ahead for our team? Working with the BCA on the enhancement list, working with the courts and the BCA to improve information about service of OFPs, more community outreach and engagement, and really developing the next phases of the Minneapolis model from the information we learn at our community meetings and the community engagement. Any questions?
Any questions? Councilmember Palmisano?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple questions. In one of your slides, at least on paper, it might have been changed. It says that the mayor's proposed budget includes funding for this for a project in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
That, not to my knowledge. So yeah, I'm just hoping that you can help clarify.
Mr. Chair, yeah, and Councilmember Palmisano, there is money in the budget for to continue for another year this domestic violence, violent crime hotspots outreach, where some of the money goes to the Minneapolis Police Department for these follow-up visits, and then with a family therapist to go out. The police inspectors in the 4th Precinct and 5th Precinct and 3rd Precinct all expressed strong support for the continuing it for another year.
Okay, that's great to know, because I understand that the one-time money from last year did not make it into this year's budget, but I think I might be a little bit confused then as to where that money's coming from, or what department it's being allocated to. So thank you. I'll follow up on that. My other question was about, in a much earlier slide, you had mentioned something I didn't know existed, the Hennepin County Domestic Fatality Review Team.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious what kinds of things we learn from that team, and just maybe how that fits in to this other collaboration and all the other community partners. If you know and
Yep.
can just share a little bit more. I just didn't know that it existed.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, the Fatality Review Team has been in existence since, I believe, the early 2000s. It's a group that's multidisciplinary, and what they do is they look at domestic violence-related homicides that have occurred in Hennepin County after the fact, after any criminal prosecution is done, after any appeals are done. And really what they do is look at the case from the time the offender and the victim were young and look at their families of origin. They look at any contacts they've had throughout the criminal justice system, the advocacy system, in the schools, any place they can get information, hospitals, clinics, psychiatric records, and really look and see, were there any missed opportunities in the history of these people that we could have intervened differently. It's not about placing blame. It's about using a horrible situation to improve the way we look at the system. There have been many recommendations of that team that are adopted by both the city of Minneapolis and the county in general. I'll give you just a couple brief examples. The domestic assault strangulation law, which went into effect back in 2009, actually was a recommendation out of that team. What they saw was that many of the homicides that had occurred had incidents where strangulation had occurred, and prior to the felony strangulation law going into place, a strangulation case could only be charged as a misdemeanor. Now, obviously, they had looked at some of the data about lethality factors, and strangulation was a high lethality factor. So members of that team, including representatives from the Minneapolis Police Department, testified before the legislature in support of that new felony strangulation law, and they implemented that law, and it's been a very effective tool since then in keeping victims safe. Another more local example is when I was on the team, there was a case where the person had an order for protection, but the officers did not look that up, and it was not included in the report. The original case came in as a felony level assault that was not supported by the evidence. No one thought to look for the OFP, and so the offender was not charged with that offense. About 6 months later, he ended up killing this woman. It wasn't directly related to that incident, but there was a missed opportunity for looking for order to protection on every domestic related call. And so that's one of the main reasons in the domestic protocol that we put in place back in 2008, that we did include as a piece of that protocol for officers to check on every single call to see if there was an order for protection or a no contact order in place. And that has proven a very effective, because sometimes we don't have enough evidence to prove the assault case, but we do have enough to prove a violation of the order for protection. And so those are two very small examples, or maybe big examples. There are many, many more. And if anyone is interested, the Fatality Review Team does have a website called A Matter of Life and Death. Every year they publish a report about the cases they reviewed and the recommendations that come from those reviews. We always look at them to see if there's anything we could implement here in Minneapolis, but it's a useful website for anyone who's interested, because oftentimes there are recommendations for public entities like city councils, mayor's offices. So it is a very, it's probably one of the hardest groups I ever served on, but it was also one of the most gratifying, because we did see some changes that came out of there that have proven very helpful for victim safety and offender accountability.
Thank you. That really helps illustrate how all of this fits together and how we keep finding opportunities for improvement in this kind of work. So thank you.
Any other? Councilmember Quincy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that question from Councilmember Palmisano, because I know part of what we're looking at, especially with our partners at Domestic Abuse Project recently, is going back in history is really predictive so much, especially for the children who are involved in a domestic abuse situation when they're kids. What can happen to them is that can change their trajectory of life when they get to be adults. So I think building that into the process is really helpful to help understand how that affects a kid. Is really tragic. And I'm particularly interested in learning more about the fatality. Obviously, the 2 homicides that we had, domestic related, both happened to be in the 11th Ward. And I'm guessing these spots that they happened at were not necessarily predictive. They wouldn't have been on our traditional hotspots that we would be looking at a map. And I think it also reflects part of our concern here, because we can only deal with what's in Minneapolis in front of us. We also have to look at mobility, and working with the county is really helpful, because I can think of both of these cases. They weren't longtime residents of the neighborhoods. They came from other cities from within Hennepin County in these particular cases. But so having cross jurisdictions is really important to this, especially to the enhancement laws, that we can make sure we're not watching just the people we know about in the city of Minneapolis, because those borders are very transparent. So my question, I guess, is how can we expand this, especially the enhancement and the data sharing with the OJP grant kind of stuff? Can we go beyond Minneapolis? Can we go beyond Hennepin County? Can we go beyond even the state of Minnesota?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Quincy, I think that really is the direction our office is going in. In addition to my domestic violence work, the other area I work in is a lot of our IT-related projects, and I serve on a committee called the Hennepin Justice Integration Partners. It's interesting you say that about sharing information with our partners in the suburbs and throughout the state, because that is one of the big projects we're working on now, is finding a better way to share information among our partners. And so I actually have some meetings set up next week and going into November to talk with some of our suburban partners about better information sharing, creating a centralized hub that will allow us to access information on a much more stronger basis. And I think that is something that we're looking at going forward. I really believe that that will be a nationwide model, and that we should be promoting some of the work that we're doing with information sharing. Some of the suburban jurisdictions and some other jurisdictions throughout the state actually already receive a copy of our enhancement list because they are familiar with the work that we've put in, and they are familiar that our offenders do not just live in Minneapolis. They may go to Brooklyn Park, they may go to St. Cloud, Rochester, and those are some of the other places we share the enhancement list currently. The other piece I think that I'm really excited about is some of the outreach and community engagement we're going to be doing over the next couple of years with our new state victim services grant. We are going to be focusing on agencies in Minneapolis, but we will also be focusing on sharing information with people working with people in the hopes that they can share that information on a wider basis, and that people don't have to wait till the criminal justice system intervenes to get help with domestic violence, that there's more awareness of what's going on, prevention, identification. Because I think oftentimes, particularly with young people, they don't identify this boyfriend who's very possessive as perhaps that being an indicator of domestic violence. And so that is some of the work that I'm really looking forward to us doing. And I think it is... it's the whole idea of training the trainer, because reaching out to one victim is great, but if you can reach out to a nurse who sees 20 victims of domestic violence in a week, that has a greater impact. And sometimes having that support from a helper or supportive person is more important than having it themselves.
Good. Thank you. Just the additional kind of question on the OFP issue. Mm-hmm. Is that work really confined to the order for protection for that domestic partnership, or does it transfer when that partnership dissolves and suddenly this guy is with a different partner? How does that? Are we tracking the actual person that it's directed towards, or is it just to the relationship that caused that incident?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Quincy, the order for protection is specific to one particular victim. However, we do keep information on prior orders for protection, so it is a public record that we do look at. So oftentimes many of these abusers or offenders will move from one victim to the next victim, and that is information that we do consider when we're looking at the cases in deciding what we're going to do, and making the orders for protection more visible will help future victims or future girlfriends look at their partners differently as well.
Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, I will move item number 9 as a receive and file item. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. And With that, we have disposed of all the business before us, and so we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.